Imagine if you're in a position where it's like you might lose your job. Let's say you're a father with a young family, you've got kids you gotta feed, you have to be able to pay for your mortgage and your car and all your other bills. And if you speak your mind, you might lose your job and be out of a job. You might choose to stay quiet so that you can keep your job. And that's the position that a lot of people are in. It's like, I'm safe if I'm silent. I'm safe if I'm silent. And that is what we have to break out of by emboldening more people to take the risk.
Seth, thanks for sitting down with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you out in California.
Finally, yeah, again. I think the last time I saw you was maybe a few years out here.
I know, it's pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
A lot has changed. Do you ever feel post-pandemic a little socially awkward? You
no.
were in Florida. You guys never shut down.
Yeah, in Florida, it's like, I feel weird when I come out of Florida. I come places like this, like the hotel I'm staying at, they still got all these plexiglass shields and everyone's wearing masks and there's signs up about distancing. I'm like, is it 2020 still? What's going on here?
For some people, I think it will always be 2020, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems that way.
So I was so excited and cheering for you very loudly when you went on Joe Rogan recently. And I want to start with that because it was this moment that I thought I would never see. Because I listen to Joe Rogan, I think a lot of the world does anyways. He almost never had a guest talk about the pro-life cause.
You don't have the right to tell my 14-year-old daughter she has to carry her rapist baby. You understand that?
To look that woman in the eye who was born
listen,
of a rape.
Do you understand that? That's a 14-year-old child. If a 14-year-old child gets raped, you say that they have to carry that baby?
I don't think two wrongs make a right. I don't think
murder. I don't think
murder
that's
is
wrong.
an answer to. I don't think murder fixes a rape.
What if we're talking about an abortion when the fetus, literally, it's like 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 days? What if she just turned positive, just now, positive for pregnancy?
I just disagree that.
What if it just happened today?
You can draw a line on when.
You can't.
Once life has begun, I don't think you draw
at the very
lines.
moment.
I would lay it out like this. I would say, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human life. Therefore, abortion is wrong. And I don't think any of the examples of how developed is it? Can it think? Is it conscious? Can it dream? Can it feel pain?
So for you, it's the moment of conception.
I think that if it's a human life, a distinct human life, then I think it's wrong to end its life. And
so you think that once the conception happens, there's some sort of a miraculous event, at the very moment. You could literally get to the point where the sperm cracks the egg. If you could scoop that egg out right there, would that be abortion?
Well, I mean, at some point you're going to have to say there was a magic moment that happened because you believe that we eventually become valuable humans, right?
Well, listen,
where's the moment where you think the magic happened? When we start talking about harmful misinformation and the types of things that are considered, that I say or that we tweet or the jokes that we make that are considered harmful misinformation, I'm like, well, what about calling that baby a clump of cells? I think that's harmful misinformation because then you're encouraging people to kill it like it's nothing when it's actually a human life. It's a developing human life. I think abortion is healthcare the way that rape is lovemaking. If we want to use rape as an example, I think they're opposites, and it's these are euphemisms that we use. We use the word healthcare. We're talking about a procedure that ends an innocent human life, and we're calling it healthcare. That's like calling rape lovemaking.
And this is why it's such a human issue because I see what you're saying. Life is valuable. Yes, and people almost were the victims of abortion, and they weren't. They went on to become these amazing people, and we would have lost them.
So I didn't know that we were going to be talking about that. I think with Joe, you show up and you sit down and you have a 3-hour-long discussion, and there's no notes. You don't have okay, here's the topics I want to hit. And I had a pretty good idea of where the conversation would start, at least, because I knew why he wanted to have me on. The Babylon Bee has been the subject of some censorship, and there's this whole big tech conversation about moderation and how far is too far, and Elon Musk was looking at buying Twitter, and all of those things were happening. So I figured that would be really the focus of the conversation. And it was, at least it started that way, and then somehow, I don't even remember how exactly, we ended up wading into these other waters where we're talking about abortion, and he's bringing up the example of his 14-year-old daughter and saying, you don't have the right to tell my daughter that if she gets pregnant, she has to carry that baby.
Well, I think he wanted to debate you on something, was my impression.
Yeah.
He's your fan. He likes the Babylon Bee. And so he's looking for something to debate you on. And I don't know that he knew what you were going to say. on life.
I don't know that he did either. Yeah.
And then you came out of the gates with this strong position, and then he gave you the hardest case example, right?
Yeah.
It's the example that all the pro-abortion sides take when the debate happens. They take these really tragic, heartbreaking cases, and he used his own daughter. Like, if she was the victim of rape, I would never force her to have a baby. I mean, that's the language that's used. What did you say?
Well, I think the temptation is to maybe give on those hard cases, because it's hard to defend the position. It's hard to look at somebody and say, yeah, I think your daughter should have to keep that baby, the rapist's baby. Yeah, I think so, you know? At the same time, it's like, if you're pro-life, you're pro-life. I don't think that we can draw lines and make distinctions and say that there's some cases where, oh yeah, well, you know, we'll make an exception in that case, you know? But he did go for that hard case. He went for that hard case because of the emotional weight that it carries. And that's why people go for that one, is because, you know, it's much harder to defend an argument where you're just saying, oh yeah, I think abortion on demand is great. And, you know, sure, right up until the point of birth, or maybe even a little after, sure, why not? I mean, those are very difficult to defend. Whereas in this case, at least, you have the emotional weight of saying, this is a young girl, she's a teenager, she's ill-equipped to have a baby, she didn't want to have a baby, this person violated her in order to impregnate her. It has all of those things going for it, but it's still a human life. And so that's what I was trying to focus him on, was just, look, take the emotion out of it, take the crazy scenarios out of it, and put it in simple terms. And so I laid out like a syllogism for him, which was not like, it wasn't a biblical argument. You know, I wasn't reaching into my like religion and bringing out some kind of, you know, core religious belief that I was trying to present to him as if he should adopt that belief. It's just a simple argument that says it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. And if abortion does that, then abortion is wrong. And it's that simple. It's really that simple. So my focus in that moment was, I was very conscious of how many people were going to be watching when it was released. And I didn't want to get like defensive or really like heated in my response to him, so I tried to stay really calm and just lay out an argument for him that he would have to deal with. And so I think that was a springboard for a conversation that was really interesting, because he responded to that thoughtfully. Like, he was pondering it, thinking about it, saying, you know, this really is a human issue. There's two sides to this. He didn't stick to his original position so strenuously as I thought maybe he would.
Well, and I thought that was actually really remarkable, because it told me that this is not something he's thought a ton about.
Yeah.
That's what it looked like to me anyway, is that when you gave him that logical syllogism, abortion, it's always wrong to intentionally take an innocent life. Abortion takes an innocent life, therefore abortion's always wrong. And then, of course, people debate, well, is it a life? You know, does abortion actually end a life? Well, what does abortion do if it doesn't end a life, right? What's the point of it? And
that's how you deem it successful.
Right, you have to have the completion of not just a terminated pregnancy, but a dead baby. That's what the abortionist judges success by. And you presented that in a really clear, simple way. And I think you could almost like literally, and this is like, Joe Rogan's really good at this, like you see like the wheels turning in his head, like it's almost like you see them turning. And it's like, because he's like ponderous and he like takes his time. And I felt like he was really like listening to you.
He trapped himself at one point though, and it was a great opportunity for me to kind of expose where he was making a fallacious argument. And it was when he said, so wait a minute, you think that there's like some magical moment that happens at conception where all of a sudden this is like a
new human life?
Or, well, yeah, I mean that's what conception is. It's a pretty magical, special moment where new life comes into existence, and I believe that's when life starts. And objectively, I believe that's when life starts and becomes valuable.
It's not belief, you know.
Right,
it.
it's not.
You know
yeah.
It's not a belief. Yeah.
It's not like a conspiracy theory.
Right.
It's like that's when a new life is formed. We know that scientifically. Now you can have a philosophical and moral argument about like, you know, does its degree of development or whatever have anything to do with its value as a human? You can get into those things, but my point was, you know, that's when a distinct life is formed, and if human life should be protected, then we shouldn't kill it, even at those early stages. And he's like, so you think that there's this magical point where it becomes human? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. At some point, you have to think that there's a line that life crosses where now it's valuable. Where's that moment for you? Because you're trying to like act like I'm in a tough spot by having to explain how that's my point.
Or like you're irrational, or you're not. It's not logical or reasonable to say that life begins when the science tells us, which is the moment of fertilization. A single cell human embryo comes into existence. And so, but that's the thing, he doesn't have an answer.
Right, and I'm willing to point to a
Yeah.
certain place and say, here's where I think life begins and is valuable. Where do you think it begins and is valuable? And he didn't have an answer for that. And so that was a tricky spot for him to be in, where, you know, it was like, okay, now he's got to answer the same question he put on me. And I think it's actually one of the most effective tactics you can have when you're engaging with people who disagree with you on these things is, instead of always being on defense and trying to explain ourselves, it can be really effective to turn it around and ask the same kinds of questions back and use that rhetorical tactic of just asking questions. Instead of beating people over the head with arguments and trying to convince them, ask them questions in a way that challenges them to articulate why they believe what they believe. And then you can really get them into these tricky situations where they're like, wait a minute, I actually have to make some of the same commitments that you have to make. I have to be able to defend these things. And they end up trying to wiggle their way out of it. So, and that can really cause them to think. And I think in this conversation, it did. I think the conversation started going in a new direction. We moved away from abortion with him having kind of a thoughtful response to what I had said. Like, maybe I need to think about this more.
Yeah, the Socratic method. I mean, it actually works, because you're not just, again, debating them, you're just asking the question and letting them come to their own conclusions. And I think maybe what he realized is, oh, my original conclusion, which is that abortion's fine and actually a good thing in some cases, actually doesn't make sense.
Right.
When I consider that there's a human life involved now that is being killed.
Yeah.
So well done, thank you. I mean, millions of people heard that. And I think it's like breaking new glass ceilings in culture for you to go on Rogan and to say that in a passionate but, you know, restrained and very logical way.
Yeah.
I think it moved a lot of people.
I didn't prepare to have that conversation because I didn't, you know, there wasn't like, we didn't have the notes planned. It wasn't a topic that I knew I was going to be discussing. But I had prepared to have that conversation by actually having studied and thought through these things. So
Did
that I would
live action
have,
help you?
Yeah, live action is a great resource. You know, there's so many answers to the terrible arguments that are out there. You know, the fallacious, question-begging arguments in favor of abortion on demand. Well, I mean, and a number of other, you know, pro-life apologists, you know, like Francis Beckwith's book, Defending
He's
Life, is really
awesome.
great. So there's a lot of authors that I've read, thinkers, you know, I just read Ryan Anderson's most recent book.
Also awesome.
Very good book. So, you know, you have resources there that if you tap into them, you're equipped to have these conversations. And you don't have to go Google something. You don't have to, you know, these aren't difficult things. That syllogism that I presented is very easy to memorize and present to somebody and easy to defend, because both of the premises in that argument are more plausibly true than false. And it's very tricky for someone to try to wiggle their way out of that. They've got to try to refute one of your premises.
Well, and I think what you're saying, which is a really important point just in general for people of values and faith and conviction who are trying to make a difference, is learning should be a lifestyle.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something that you can like Google the night before to cheat on a test if you're like having a conversation with a friend, or, you know, Google not to cheat, but like to try to like cram your study and then like try to do okay on a test. We live out relationships with people, and if you're doing an interview, it's a relationship you're having with the person you're talking with, and it needs to be in you deeply, the why for what you believe, and being able to articulate that to the people you're engaging with.
And it's not just beneficial for the person you're talking to, it's beneficial for yourself.
Exactly.
Because in order to really have a strength of conviction internally and to be confident in what you believe, you have to have reasons for why you believe it. You need to be able to articulate. Even if you never get into a situation where you're debating Joe Rogan on one of the biggest stages imaginable, you still need to be able to have that for yourself. So I think that's very important, because a lot of people, they'll just, yeah, sure, I'm pro-life, but can they actually even defend that position? Probably not that well. And I think that's sad. I think people would really benefit from doing that work just for themselves, if not for the benefit of others.
Yeah, I think that's one of the top things that I see with people, is they feel a fear about their own pro-life stance, and they don't know, they're insecure about it, basically.
Yeah.
And so we get sometimes at live action, actually not sometimes, pretty much every day, multiple times a day, people saying, what do I say in response to this? And, you know, sometimes I respond. I mean, usually our team is trying to send the resource, but listen, we have all the answers actually on our website, or these books, our resource list of these fantastic books that have been written, and take the time, you know, to invest in yourself and take the time to, you know, watch these videos, read these books. You know, it doesn't have to do it in 1 week. It's over time, you know, an hour here, half an hour here, because it'll make you better confident about your own conviction. You know deep down it's right not to kill a baby. You know
Right.
deep down abortion's wrong. You want something
Intuitively,
better.
you get it, but you need to
Most
rationally
people
defend
do.
it. Yeah.
And I think even like Joe Rogan, I think deep down there's an intuition he has that it's bad too.
Right.
But you were connecting the intellectual dots for him.
Right.
Because I think the pro-life sentiment actually exists in all of us. Like deep down, people I think are pro-life, and when they actually think a lot about abortion, it makes them uncomfortable. It's not, most people are not happily pro-choice. It's kind of like, well, in these horrible cases, I have to be pro-choice. And so when you were giving the logical syllogism and defending that the right of a life from the moment of its existence, when the science shows us life exists, I think the wheels turned for him.
Yeah.
And there were intellectual dots that were connected.
But even if they hadn't, one of the things that people ask me sometimes, like why I engage with people online about these things, you're
Yeah.
never going to change their mind. Well, maybe you won't. But the important thing is that there are people, when you're engaging, whether it's on social media or in a context like that where you're on somebody's show and you have an audience that's watching you, it's not always about, you don't have to think of it in terms of, if I don't change their mind, I've lost or I haven't accomplished anything. There's so many people who are watching, who are seeing both sides play out, and they're seeing you defend your position, and they're evaluating that. And there's a lot of people on the sidelines. You may never hear from them. Maybe they'll DM you later. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And their viewpoint can change as a result of those conversations. So it's not necessarily the person that you're talking to that you're trying to convince. You just need to defend, you need to put forth your case and let other people see it and evaluate it for themselves, regardless of whether you're going to change the mind of the person that you're talking to.
Well, and I think another great point that you're making is that a lot of people do not want to be passionate about anything controversial, because they like to just kind of go with what everyone else is saying and they don't want to stick out. And so, but they are going to agree when they hear something still. They're going to be like, that makes sense, and they're going to tuck that in. And so, one of our strategies at Live Action is how do we make it more easy and more popular to be pro-life? To assent to the truth of the humanity of the baby and the violence of abortion, like to acknowledge that. How do we make it more popular?
Right.
Because a lot of people, they're actually deep down with you. And they're with us on this, but they need more confidence in knowing that they're not going to be a social pariah, in saying it. So the more people say it, the less people feel intimidated to be it.
And that's such an important point, because that's an issue all the time where these things come up with the conversation about censorship and, like free speech, and what can people do to encourage more dialogue, more debate, and push back on this, like cancel culture mob mentality that's going to try to destroy if you say or believe the wrong thing. And the answer to that is to speak more, is to stand up and actually defend your position, because the more we silence ourselves or like suppress our own voice, the more power we give to the people who want to censor us.
Yes.
The way that I put it, I say, it's like if you...
Self-censorship.
Self-censorship.
You don't self-censor. You might as well join them.
You're doing the tyrant's
Join
work
the
for
censors.
him when you
true.
self-censor. So I think it's very important on this topic and a wide variety of others, regardless of what your values are. Don't be afraid to speak them, even if you're not supposed to, especially if you're not supposed to, because that's the environment where censorship wins, and ideas that need to be defended and bad ideas that need to be confronted don't end up being addressed properly because people are just holding it all in. So, your organization's been very good at being very vocal and bold. I think we've been trying to do everything that we can to make a stand for free speech and being outspoken in what you believe and speaking truth to culture anyway, even if you're not supposed to say these things. And the more people that do that, the less of a pariah you make yourself, the less likely you are to be ostracized and marginalized for articulating
And the
beliefs.
more you help the next person.
Yep. Exactly.
I think what's powerful about what you're doing right now is beyond, you're powerful, you're speaking on Joe Rogan, but you're also running businesses. You're a business leader, and you're extremely outspoken about your beliefs. And I think I was just talking with John Gibson recently, who I don't know if you're familiar with.
I know John,
Tripwire.
He's a friend, I love John, he's great.
So he is just, he was the owner, co-founder of one of the largest, or the largest independent game studios in the world.
Yeah.
And he tweeted when the heartbeat law was passed in Texas and was upheld in the Supreme Court that now they could save lives of children who have detectable heartbeat in Texas. He tweeted support for that, which, by the way, more people nationally support that law than oppose it.
Right.
It's like 46% support the Texas heartbeat law, 43% oppose it. So more people actually even support that. He was attacked viciously online.
Yep.
All these corporate leaders and CEOs, and when Roe v. Wade fell, the same thing happened. All these corporate CEOs and leaders are like, oh, how horrible, abortion is so necessary, we're gonna pay for women to have abortions. What's your take on the it's wokeism that has, the stranglehold on corporate America, but it's also pro-abortion nonsense that's just everywhere. And I feel like we need like 10 Johns to stand up and speak out and tweet. He was like the only one who dared do it. I mean, you're doing it.
Yeah.
You were already out there doing it though, like, blazing the trail, like John the Baptist. But like Drip, he's out there doing it. We need like 20, 30, 40 more CEOs who are just like, enough with this silencing. I'm just gonna say my piece, try to fire me, try to kill me, but if there's enough of us and we normalize it enough, I feel like we could actually change something.
Yeah, well, they actually ran him out of his company, basically, where he was the CEO of this company. And the employees were like petitioning to get him to resign.
But he said it was like 5 to
him.
10 of them employees,
Yeah.
and they were like 50. So it's
Well,
always
this is
this
how it
small
works.
crowd of
It's a
terrorists.
small crowd.
He calls them social terrorists.
Social terrorists, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a good phrase for it. I hesitate to use the word terrorist when there's no actual violence involved,
Sure.
but with social terrorism, what he means is it's like, you're using intimidation.
Right.
You're using intimidation to suppress other voices and opinions. And I think...
And to destroy livelihoods.
Right.
And reputations.
Yep. And the way to fight back against that is to say, I don't care. You can try to do that, but I'm going to speak my mind anyway.
But there have to be enough other people doing it.
There have to be enough.
If more of them did it, more people did it, and I think more will do it, the more people like you and John do it, and speak out as business leaders on behalf of life and just their values, even when they're controversial.
Yeah.
They violate this like woke code.
Well, that's the
We're
thing.
gonna
The
get more of
reason
it.
John was easy to take down is because there weren't more Johns before John.
Exactly.
And so at least he didn't back down and apologize. This is the one thing I say, you never apologize to the mob, because when you apologize to the mob, you're feeding it, making it grow stronger. We have to start starving the mob. And if you stop giving them what they want, you take their power away, and they can't do that. So you need more voices like that.
And at the end of the day, it's like, what is right?
Right.
What is the right thing to do? If what
Right.
you said was true, why would you apologize for it? If what you said wasn't true, you can. I actually say, listen, apology. If you're actually like said something that was false, which John didn't say. He said something really profound and beautiful and positive about celebrating the lives saved in Texas. Why would you apologize for truth telling?
Well, it's easy to say that, but imagine if you're in a position where it's like you might lose your job. Let's say you're a father with a young family, you've got kids you got to feed, you have to be able to pay for your mortgage and your car and all your other bills. And if you speak your mind, you might lose your job and be out of a job. You might choose to stay quiet so that you can keep your job. And that's the position that a lot of people are in. It's like, I'm safe if I'm silent. I'm safe if I'm silent. And that is what we have to break out of by emboldening more people to take the risk. So one of the ways that I put it recently when I was asked about this, like the whole Twitter thing, like, getting suspended on Twitter and whether or not that's something to like be proud of or whatever. And I'm like, I think it is honestly a great accomplishment to be punished for saying something true. It is. Even though it's like a negative and it can affect you really negatively, I think there are positives that come from that. You just have to be willing to look down the road for it.
Well, especially if you stay the course.
Yeah, you have to stay the course.
Like you said, because you guys didn't take down the tweet, you guys didn't relent in your truth telling, your satirical truth telling, and so you were off Twitter for how many months?
8 months.
That's a long time for a business.
8 months.
That probably drives a
There
lot
were
of
a lot
web
of people
traffic
that were saying, a week from now he's going to delete the tweet and be back on or whatever, and we steadfastly refused to do that. It was a situation where they were saying that unless we needed to delete the tweet that we posted about Rachel Levine, the transgender health admiral. We needed to delete this tweet and admit that we engaged in hateful conduct in order to get back on. And so, that was a situation, we didn't even consider doing that. We were willing to say, you know what, we'll give up Twitter for this purpose, because if nobody ever does that, then they just maintain this control over you. They maintain control over discourse. They can force you to say that 2 and 2 make 5 instead of 4, or they can force you to be quiet if you're going to insist that 2 and 2 make 4. And that is not a healthy place to be in. It is a completely anti-truth environment for speech. And anybody who loves truth or values life has to be willing to fight back against that, even if it means there's going to be a personal cost. And the more people are willing to do that, the less cost there will be, because you're going to embolden and enable other people to do it. So thank God for people like John, because we need more like that.
Yeah, I think if we had like even just 10 Johns
Yeah.
who regularly just went out there. I think it would kind of like, it's like the emperor has
Can
no
you think of any
clothes
other
in a way.
story? Is there anyone else like him right
Well,
now?
not right now. And we just, did an interview with him, and I'm encouraging him, like, go out on the speaking circuit, like, encourage other CEOs, because you were like a legit CEO of a major company, hundreds of millions of dollars worth company, like it was a successful company, and you took the heat and you didn't apologize for your beliefs. Okay, so how did you become pro-life? Why are you so passionate?
I like how you followed up with the why are you so passionate, because I don't really have an answer to like when I became pro-life. I've kind of always been pro-life. I was raised in a Christian home that valued life, and so that was kind of instilled in me from an early age. It wasn't like I changed my mind at some point, which those are the best stories, by the way. I love when people are like, oh, I was an atheist until I was 30 and then I became a Christian. That's a much better story than someone who's just always been a Christian. It's kind of, I feel like it takes away from your credibility
Your
if you grow up
story's
in
still
it.
good. It's still good to say, listen, I was raised with pro-life parents. I mean, that's a beautiful thing.
But the better thing, why are you so passionate about it? That's one of those questions I flip on its head. Why are you not passionate about it? Like, how can you be quiet about, when we're talking about so many people, especially like the compassionate left, the secular progressive left that's so compassionate. It's all of their arguments and all of these things that they're trying to advance, it's all about harm reduction and safety and all of these things,
And the vulnerable. I mean,
the
it's all
vulnerable,
about the
protecting the marginalized
and the marginalized.
Exactly. They seem to they act like they have a heart for that, but I'm like, wait a minute, where is there more harm when it comes to innocent life being lost and blood being shed and lives being ruined than on the subject of abortion? What's a better example of that? If that's number one, and it is, then why don't you care about that? Why aren't you passionate about that? That's how I turn that one around, because it's like to try to suggest that there's good reasons for me to be passionate about it, I just feel like is way weaker than saying why aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The leading cause of bloodshed in the world is abortion.
Yeah.
Globally and nationally. And they're our most vulnerable. I mean, their children have no recourse, no way to defend themselves. They're completely at the mercy of those stronger than them.
Right, and if we care about women and women's issues and women's mental health and women's wellness, then we should care about what abortion does to women, shouldn't we?
Yes.
So it's not just about the life, it's the love them both mentality, and if you actually care about women, then you should care deeply about this issue and what abortion does to women, where it's sold as a solution to problems when it actually creates problems.
Right, and a lot of our movement, which doesn't get the press, or doesn't get attention or acknowledgement from the opposition, the pro-abortion side, is caring for women and families and children and giving direct, financial assistance or providing medical care or supporting foster families or whatever it is. There's so much of that, thousands of pregnancy centers, but they're not getting, the headlines. However, Babylon Bee sometimes gives the life movement headlines. That's been a thing that you guys have been doing for years now, which is poking fun at just the illogic and the cruelty, really, of the pro-abortion side, and then sharing the pro-life side in a fun way. And you guys are the biggest satire site, right, in the world?
We are now, yeah.
I mean, you beat The Onion.
Yeah.
Onion's like gone. Does The Onion even exist
They're
anymore?
not gone, no,
Do
they're
they
not
exist?
gone.
Are they out there?
They do
They're
exist.
just not
but,
funny, right?
yeah,
They're not funny.
They're not as popular as we are at the moment, which is, kind of a surreal place to be in. As a little startup Christian satire site a few years ago, it's kind of crazy.
So what was the kind of thought process, or how do all those pro-life stories, satire stories, make it to the site? And they seem to perform really well. They seem to do really well.
They do. It's probably one of the most difficult topics to write satire on, because you don't think of, you don't think of a topic like abortion as being, that's a great topic for comedy. Let's write some jokes about abortion today. I mean, that's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And the point is, the difficult thing to deal with is that it's, you don't want your joke or your satirical article to be perceived as making light of abortion, because it's not an issue that you want to make light of.
Or to any way make the child or women who are really struggling the butt of any joke, because they're already, especially children, like their treatment is horrific, and they already have no voice. So that's a line to walk to ensure that they're in the joke or the satire, they are protected.
It's a difficult line. It's a difficult needle to thread, and I think that, I'll give you an example of one that I think is very effective. We did a joke about how If you remember back in, like, I think it was 2018, Bill Cosby was being accused of a sexual assault, and he was actually convicted of it. And we did a headline about how Planned Parenthood defended Bill Cosby, saying sexual assault is only 3% of what he does. Mm-hmm. And that was a take on that issue where what you're doing is, obviously Planned Parenthood is your target. That's who they say that, what abortion services is only 3% of what they do. I don't know if they still say that, but back then it was on their website. 3% of what they do is abortion. As if doing something terrible only a small amount of the time is, acceptable, right? If Bill Cosby spends 97% of his time not assaulting women, then is he a good guy? Mm-hmm. Of course not. And I think that's a very effective way of using humor to draw out the absurdity and the moral depravity of a situation.
Well, and the power of the humor that you do too is that you're already there's already okay, this is the premise is already like there. Then the premise is, okay, that 3% is bad. Mm-hmm. Abortion is bad, which even Planned Parenthood kind of is acknowledging. They're saying it's just 3%.
Right.
Why are you so obsessed with insisting that it's only one little thing? If you're proud of it, if you think abortion is a good thing, why are you always rushing to say that it's such a small part of what you do?
It shouldn't matter.
It shouldn't matter.
It shouldn't need to be rare.
It shouldn't need to be rare, exactly. Right. And that's a whole, of course, the safe, legal, rare mantra of Hillary Clinton. Like abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. That used to be the posture of even the Democrat Party in the past. The 90s or the early 2000s,
That's
and
been
now
long since abandoned.
Yeah, now there's this big vacillation because I think they realize if we go that route of saying, okay, abortion only in some cases and everything else, they lose their most passionate pro-abortion, like abortionist lobbyist peoples, because those are the people who say, shout your abortion.
Right.
They want to make money off of abortions. They don't want you to be embarrassed of them, but they are your base. Mm-hmm. So you have to, if you're going to be out there, you have to get your base happy. And that's, I think, what we're seeing today with the extremism from the pro-abortion side. And it's, I think, easy to make jokes about because it is so extreme and it is so irrational and it's so cruel too.
Yep.
It's the cruelty of abortion through all 9 months. When you really sit down and think about it for an honest moment, this child, through all 9 months of pregnancy at any moment, it's okay, it's acceptable to dismember that child, to destroy that child. That living child. I mean, the only word for that is horror. I mean, there's cruelty there.
And we find ways, we looked for ways to draw out the hypocrisy throughout the pandemic, for example, because so much, obviously there's the my body, my choice mantra that they, my body, my choice, my body, my choice. And then there was the whole vaccine mandate thing where's the choice there? They wanted to try to push this on everybody. All of a sudden, it's not your body, your choice. Well, why? Well, because there's other lives at stake. Well, now wait a minute. That's why in abortion, it doesn't make sense to say my body, my choice, because there's another life at stake. It's not just your body that matters. So you can point to that. We did a headline.
The one thing I didn't like about that, though, it was like they were saying, well, my body, my choice for the vaccine. But my body, my choice obviously isn't true when it comes to abortion. And so the opposition side, the opposing side, the kind of pro-vax side could just say like, well, you guys, come on, you're being hypocritical now. It's like this endless like, well, you're hypocritical, well, you're hypocritical.
You can end up in a cycle with that.
Yeah, and it became a cycle. And I'm like, listen, it's clever, sure, but at the end of the day, our body choices, end when other choices are at risk, right? So like my body, the choice of what I do with my body, if there's another body involved, my child, whether in or outside of my body, like I don't have the right to choose to kill that body.
Right.
And so, I think the vaccine thing is an important debate to have and everything else. But I'm like, there shouldn't even be a debate about whether to kill babies.
Right.
Like when there's a pandemic, how serious is it? Is this a good or bad vaccine? Yeah, there's a very valid debate to have. But I'm like, why? I didn't like the comparing. I didn't like the comparing of the debates.
Well, it's any opportunity to point out hypocrisy, I think, is what the satirist is trying to accomplish, is by saying, look, you've been saying one thing and now you're doing a different thing, and highlighting that. Like the idea that, if it saves even one life. That's the kind of thing that they were talking about with masking and
that
vaccination.
Was remarkable to hear Andrew Cuomo saying, I want to save Governor Cuomo of New York saying, I just want to save one life.
And if everything we do saves just one life, I'll be happy.
You passed the Reproductive Health Act in 2019 before the pandemic
Right.
that was literally permitting the killing of a baby up until the moment of birth
Right.
for any reason. And you're talking to me on national TV and being the hero for saving one life during the pandemic. And then,
Yeah.
of course, what he did to the elderly people in his state to expose them to the virus and the death toll that took on elderly in nursing homes. I mean, that was another scandal of his.
Yeah.
But the whole thing was just, the irony was very clear.
The irony was, yeah, it's really rich when you've got somebody they support abortion on demand, and they're looking you straight in the face and saying, if it saves even one life, you must do this. It's like, really? You're gonna say that? So we did a couple headlines about that. So I think you can effectively, comedy or satire in particular, I think does a good job of using irony and exaggeration to kind of draw out this hypocrisy, these double standards, and expose kind of bad ideas for being bad ideas that are either baseless or can't be held to consistently, right? So, that's, I think, for those issues, that's what we've tried to focus on, is doing that. And it is difficult to accomplish that without making light of such a serious topic. So,
but you do it well. I mean,
Yeah.
you guys are obviously excellent at the craft, and it's been a bit of an inspiration to my team. We've done a few satirical videos, and they do really well. Like people
Yeah.
love seeing the inconsistencies pointed out in a entertaining way.
Yep.
And so, we just did one on a generous offer, satirizing the corporate boss who tells his pregnant employees, I'm going to pay for you to go out of state to have an abortion.
Right.
And just the inherent pressure in there of going to have an abortion when you're pregnant instead of taking maternity leave and being out of the office.
yeah.
Which
And it
is
was
a
very
real thing.
effective. I think it was very effective. It was well done. It was very well done. And it's so sad that this is a real thing. It's one of these things where it's like, how is it real that you have these companies out there bragging, oh, okay, if your state's going to ban abortion, we'll pay to fly you out of that state.
Like competing against each other.
$3,000 we'll give you. What a cynical thing that like assuming that women want or need to stay at their desk and not have kids, and they're gonna feel like you're looking out for women by giving them money to do that, like to incentivize them to stay at their workstation.
And it's killing the family member of your employee.
Right.
Like it's literally, abortion. You're hiring a hitman to kill
Right.
your family member, and now your boss is doing that so
Right.
that you can be productive.
Right. And that deserves to be mocked. And I think that video did it very effectively. And so, I come back to this all the time. People say, we were talking about safety a moment ago, this whole idea of, keeping people safe and harm reduction and everything. And one of the things that we've gotten into our heads is that in order to keep everyone safe, we have to be constantly mindful of what their feelings are and whether we're hurting their feelings. And we can't make fun of things because it's going to hurt people's feelings. And I think what you guys did with that video and what we try to do with our satire is to employ mockery to expose foolishness before it's taken, so that it isn't taken seriously.
And so
right?
it doesn't harm more people.
So it doesn't harm more
Because it's actually,
people.
you're trying to help people. I mean,
Right.
and like when we designed those videos, we were very intentional about it because we're not here to mock the vulnerable, like women who are in really tough situations and, feeling pressure to abort. Like that's
Yeah.
not, we're there to actually advocate for them. We're here to mock the people that are causing harm
Right.
and have power and need
Exactly.
to stop doing it.
Exactly. And and there's a moral imperative for that mockery. That mockery, it's not the mockery of putting someone down and making them feel bad about themselves. It's the mockery that tries to expose the foolishness and prevent these bad ideas from being taken seriously. Because I said this on Rogan when I was talking with him about what the satirist's job is. And I said, look, we have this situation where absurd ideas, bad ideas that are harmful are taken seriously because we haven't sufficiently mocked them. We should, instead of mocking them and making fun of them, we took them seriously, we affirmed and accepted what we should have ridiculed and rejected. And that's put us in a situation where we have all this insanity that's now normalized. Great examples are like this idea that like a 3-year-old can be transgender, for example, and should start social transitioning and then go on puberty blockers. Now, all of these things, these are harmful, bad ideas, and they're normal now because we didn't mock them sufficiently.
Well, and the key is mocking an idea that's toxic.
Right.
And exposing it. I mean, mock is a strong word. You're exposing the idea with humor.
Right.
That's what I'd
Yeah.
like to say. And I think that the key there is you're in no way directing that fire against the victim. Like in that scenario you just mentioned, like the child who's being
Yeah, the child's not the
transgendered.
target of the mockery.
No, it's
No.
the people that are making a social experiment out of a young life.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think that's the power, is when the light, the fiery hot light of criticism or whatever is pointed at the people that need correction, or the ideas, most importantly, that need correction for the sake of everyone.
Yep.
And for the sake of even the corporate boss. Look, I want the kind of, we were making fun of showing the hypocrisy of these bosses. I want bosses to be good bosses.
Right.
They have power to do good. And that's when, interviewing John and talking to you now, you're a boss, you have employees, you have staff, and more people need to see people like you and John and others out there saying, this is how you be a pro-life boss. And John was actually talking about his maternity leave benefits, how they were some of the best in the industry. And he fought for that. And profit sharing with his staff so that they could afford to buy better homes and cars and things like that for their families. That was part of his ethic as a boss.
That's great.
And so, part of our mission is, show the evil, but also show the good. There are good people like John out there, yourself, speaking,
there should be an answer
speaking
for
truth
that.
on Joe Rogan. That good example is important too.
If there's executives that are incentivizing abortion, there should be executives on the other side incentivizing motherhood.
Yeah. Helping better maternity leave, helping with adoption costs if that's what the family chooses to do. Just better support for parents in general, I think is part of the pro-life future. All right, so moving forward, there's so much going on in the world right now. Elon buys Twitter. There's war in Ukraine and Russia. We're looking at this presidential, our president and what's going on there, and then the election that's going to come up, who's going to run, and who's going to be the candidate on the other side. And then the economy, double dip recession potentially. Where do you see moving forward? Well, first of all, where do you see you and your companies going? What's the future for you guys when you look at also the impact that needs to be made for culture?
We're growing, fortunately, which is good. I know there's other satire sites that are scaling back right now, like the Washington Post, for example. I think they just let a bunch of people go. CNN canceled CNN Plus. They're struggling. So a lot of our satirical
The jokes
competition,
just weren't funny enough.
Yeah. We happen to be. One of the reasons I think that we're successful right now is because we're actually doing the comedian's job. I feel like all of these, the bad ideas that we're talking about that need to be mocked or ridiculed or dismissed or refuted, comedians are avoiding dealing with those issues because they don't want to be canceled. They're literally being attacked on stage. You have them being slapped or punched on stage. People are running out of the audience to confront comedians who make jokes they're not supposed to make. They're being canceled online. Their accounts are being suspended. So there's a lot of pressure on comedians to censor. But the ones who actually make the jokes they're not supposed to make are being very successful right now. And the efforts to cancel us have kind of backfired. They've only drawn more attention to us.
No, because people are hungry for the irreverent, not for irreverence sake. But because I mentioned the emperor has no clothes earlier, a lot of people deep down know a lot of the stuff that's happening. Men can be women, women can be men. The extremism on abortion, complete disrespect for life in the womb. All of these sort of hyper politicization of the workplace. People know this doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so they're waiting for somebody to poke fun at the emperor who has no clothes. That one lone voice who dares to say it. Everyone's like, oh, emperor. And that one voice is like, you don't have clothes on.
Right.
This doesn't make sense. What are you doing?
Right.
And you guys are doing that, and there's some voices that are doing that.
There's never been, so there's a couple of things that are weird. People come up to me all the time and they say, your job should be easier than ever. It's a target-rich environment. There's so much insanity in the world, and it's true. The insanity is everywhere. Math is considered racist now. Men are able to get pregnant and chest feed, we're told.
No, they can't.
All of these things.
They can't.
But that's what
Spoiler
they're telling
alert.
us, right? All these insane, literally insane ideas. It's this, the 2 and 2 make 5 thing. It's just obviously wrong, right? But these are popular ideas, and they're being pushed on us from the top down. And so, we have to push back on that and confront those ideas. And I think that anyone who's willing to do that from a comedic perspective, who's willing to challenge these things, is going to get a lot of attention because people realize that this stuff is insane and absurd and it deserves to be made fun of. And so I think that's part of the reason we're successful, is because we're one of those voices that's willing to challenge these popular narratives that are so obviously insane.
And you're entertaining. I think that's important too. Because there's kind of a crop of new voices that are standing up to the man as they see it.
Yeah.
But when you do it with some entertainment, or you do it with some grace, or you have something that is compelling in how you do it, I think it makes a big difference.
But it is hard. I mean, and this is the thing. It's people say it should be easier than ever, and I'm actually, actually, you know, it's like when reality's that absurd, it's hard to satirize because satire uses exaggeration to make its points.
It's an
How do you
interesting point.
exaggerate this idea? You know, like the idea that men can become pregnant. How do you make fun of that? Like just showcasing it is funny. Like how do you go beyond that and
Well,
exaggerate
when you
it?
destroy all common sense.
Yeah.
You know, like, how do you know the sky's blue? Because they looked at it. It is blue.
Right,
Well, how do you
yeah.
know? How do you know it's blue? How do you really know it's blue?
The way I
mean,
put
you're
it, though, is like, you know, imagine if your job is to make jokes that are funnier than what Democrats are doing in real life right now or saying in real life. Or imagine if your job was to write something that's funnier than a Kamala Harris speech. Like, that's hard to do. It's really funny. Like, what the words that come out of her mouth are hysterical.
So your job's easy. Just play clips.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, that's not the B, right?
Yeah,
That's the backup
right.
plan. For when we can't make the jokes anymore because the world's too absurd, we'll just, you know, highlight what's actually happening on Not the B.
So last question, and thanks for sitting down with me, Seth. I'm very grateful for you supporting the pro-life cause, supporting live action, for being a voice that's bold and brave and compelling, and for the work you're doing. It's all awesome.
Thank you.
Going forward into the future, do you think that our culture war, our pro-life fight specifically for life, do you think we can win this? What's your take on it?
I mean,
I believe we do.
I think
Yeah.
so. I mean, I'm optimistic with this stuff. I think that ultimately, you know, truth and reason will prevail. I'm not, you know, I'm cynical on the one hand because I have very little faith in people because of all the insanity that's become so popular. But on the other hand, it's like, you really do see a lot of momentum building in the other direction. And with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the precedent that now has set, and I mean, the fight's just beginning, as you know, going back to like the state level and having to wage this war now at the really local with the ground game. It's a big fight, but I feel like the momentum is there and that there's a lot to be hopeful for, and that we have, you know, everything going for us, including the truth, right? So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about the future for the culture war, and I do think that the overreach of pushing way too far in this secular, progressive, extreme leftism direction has to some extent backfired because the insanity is so crazy. Reasonable people are seeing it for what it is and are wanting to move that pendulum back in the other direction. So I'm optimistic about where we're going from here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think reason and goodness, the truth will prevail. And let's help make it happen.
Yep.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
Thanks for sitting down.